So what is the safest lane position when you're riding on the road in Florida? It probably is not what you think. Our guest is Keri Caffrey this morning from the Florida Bicycle Education, the American Bicycle Education Association. And many of you know Keri through Cycling Savvy. It was a program she started really with the cooperation of the Florida Bicycle Association back in 2008 or 2009. Is that right, Keri?
2009, Mike Wilson and I
Okay. All right.
started it, and with the help of the Florida Bicycle Association.
So talk to us a minute. I think the information you're going to give is going to be counterintuitive to a lot of information that people have. You know, we all know about the restriction in the law that says we're to ride as close to the right-hand side of the road as practicable, I think the word is. We have to contend with bicycle lanes and when to be in the lane, when to take the lane. So what is your position? What is your educational position on where cyclists are safest riding?
Okay, so this is a little bit of a nuanced discussion. First of all, you're right, the law is quite confusing. Even the word practicable, which most of us don't use on a daily basis. But basically practicable means what's safe for you under the circumstances in which you're riding. So we break down lane position into how we behave on 2-lane roads versus how we behave on multi-lane roads. Okay. The difference primarily is that on a 2-lane road, you have to balance safety and courtesy because it's not as easy for motorists to pass. On a multi-lane road, they have another lane to pass, and you have to maximize your position to encourage them to make that lane change early on a multi-lane road. And I'll describe a little bit about why that is. But the first thing that people need to understand about lane position is it's not your distance from the edge. It's your distance from the lane line. Because the lane line is what the motorist is cueing off of. The distance between you and the lane line is what the motorist is looking at to determine if they can pass in the lane or if they have to move over into another lane to pass. Right. So what your objective on a 2-lane road in particular, your objective is to close up that space enough that even the most spatially challenged motorist will understand that their car can't fit there. And once they understand that, they know they have to at least use part of that oncoming lane, and therefore they have to wait until that oncoming lane is clear. So that what I tell people is that's going to be a little bit different based on the width of the road and the road that you're on and the traffic dynamics. So what you want to do is you want to pick a position that you think is going to work. And then if people are passing you too close or trying to squeeze in the lane, you know you're too far right. So you just move left until you get the behavior that you want.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, you know, you and I talked in preparing for this talk, and for years I have been taking the position that you want to ride in the right wheel line. And you're like, Jim, you need to be further left than that in many situations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that my concern for many people listening to your presentation is that it seems counterintuitive to them. I think we think intuitively, if I stay to the right, I'm going to be safer because I'm going to be out of the lane. I'm going to be away from where the cars are going. But your instructions and what you teach through Cycling Savvy course is, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but the further left you go in most situations, quite frankly, the safer you're going to be because it forces the motorist to make a decision at an earlier stage in the decision process about passing and lane use.
Correct. So we're talking about lanes that are too narrow to share. And I should probably give you a little bit of a definition of that because the way the law is written, it would seem by that first paragraph of the law that it must apply to most lanes, right? Because why would you have a law that didn't apply to most lanes?
Right.
But the majority of lanes in Florida are 10 to 12 feet wide. So if you think about the width of a cyclist needs 4 feet of operating space. So we're about 2 feet wide with our handlebars and whatnot, but we're on a balanced vehicle. So in the design standards, we're assigned a minimum of 4 feet of operating space, and we could be in that space at any time. So that is our width, essentially, our design width.
Moving a little bit left, a little bit right. You're not riding in a perfectly straight line that you occupy.
Exactly.
3 feet, right?
Yes. And then motorists are required by Florida law to give us 3 feet of passing clearance. In my opinion, that's an absolute minimum, because at speed, that's way too little. So I don't want somebody passing me 3 feet away at 50 miles an hour. But so take those two together, you have 7 feet. So in a 10 feet lane, that leaves 3 feet for a car. In a 12 feet lane, that leaves 5 feet for a car. And most cars are around 7 feet wide, with the mirrors and everything. So the vast majority of our lanes are too narrow to share. So you might as well just pitch that statute out, because it doesn't apply to those lanes, because the exception under Section 3 clearly says a lane that's too narrow to share.
Yeah,
so,
and that's the use of the word substandard. The law gives you an out if you're on a substandard lane, and this is the issue with statutory construction. Substandard means nothing to the average person who's reading.
It actually means nothing to statute. Substandard has no definition in statute. There's a history to how that ended up in the statute, and it has to do with how those exceptions were constructed in California. And it was put in there thinking it meant one thing when it really didn't apply to anything in statute or even in traffic design, because a standard width lane is 12 feet and so a 12-foot lane is too narrow to share. So it's unfortunate that word is in there, because it's very confusing. It really doesn't mean anything.
So your instruction, and I agree with you, is that the requirement that cyclists ride as close to the right-hand lane as practicable really doesn't apply in the vast majority of roads in Florida, because they're all less than 14 feet. So we're already in a position where we're outside of the confines of that statutory language.
Exactly. So there's the drawing. So mission here.
Slides with us today.
I'm sorry. So in this one, this is the 2-lane road, and so you have communication. You are communicating with motorists. So if you communicate to motorists, you're communicating to motorists that it's easy for them to squeeze past you if you're over on the edge, because most motorists don't really know how wide their car is. They don't know how wide lanes are. They don't have any experience with this. And so if it looks like their car will fit, and remember, they sit on the left side of that car, so they don't know how far that car is from what they're passing.
Yeah, and how do they judge 3 feet from the beyond the right side of the car when they're on the other side of the vehicle anyway?
Yeah, exactly. So it's so you really need to tell them. You need to communicate with them by closing up that distance and making it very clear that it's not okay to squeeze past, that they do have to change lanes. And then another thing that you'll run into on 2-lane roads in particular is that motorists have somewhat poor judgment about when it's safe to pass. And again, it's a lot of times it's because they misjudge the cyclist's speed. They don't have a lot of experience with passing cyclists. So if you as a cyclist recognize that the conditions for passing are unsafe, for example, there's 50 feet away, there's a stop sign or a blind curve or something, then you move your lane position. You actually go out and you do a block, kind of. You move out toward the left side of the lane and put your hand out and tell them not to pass. Okay. So that's the 2-lane road scenario.
And so where is your recommendation for someone to ride on a 2-lane road? So you're on a 2-lane road, you're in town, the speed limit is 25, 30, maybe 35, but that would be unusual probably for most 2-lane roads.
Yeah,
they're recommending for lane position.
So your lane position, of course, it's going to vary based on whether it's a 10-foot lane or whatnot. The right tire track or the left side of the right tire track is often pretty close to where you would be on a 2-lane road. Okay. But again, you're really going to want to look at your distance from the lane line and say, my distance from the lane line is way smaller than a car. So nobody's going to mistake that they can squeeze past me.
Right.
So that on a 2-lane road, that's kind of what you're looking for.
All right. So let's step up the equation a little bit here. So now you're on a 4-lane road, 2 lanes in each direction. Typically, you've got a higher speed limit. You may or may not have a bike lane. I think
okay.
An image for that. And
yeah, we do. There's a great image, and that's actually taken from the car, so you can see what the driver is seeing.
Okay.
So on a 4-lane road or a 6-lane road, typically your speeds are going to be a little bit higher. And if you're on a 2-lane road, a motorist's conflict when they pass you is in front of them, right? They're looking at traffic that's coming toward them. And so they're going to make decisions differently than on a 4-lane road where the conflicting traffic is actually behind them because they have to change lanes to pass, which means they have to check their blind spot and move over. So what you don't want to do is ride so far right that the motorist from a distance thinks they can fit in the lane, and they stay in the lane until they get up to you and then realize they can't stay in the lane, right? And then all of a sudden now they are faced with a choice. They have to slow down because they have to check behind them to make that lane change. And so now you're going to have this dilemma where it's like, well, do I slow down and make a safe pass, or do I just bump over into that other lane at the last second and hope for the best? Well, you might get a fair amount of passing clearance from that when they bump over into the next lane. However, whereas having them do a lane split pass on a 2-lane road is not an issue because they're looking at their conflicting traffic. When they do a lane split pass on a multi-lane road, they could get surprised by a vehicle that was in their blind spot. And I'll tell you what, if they have a choice between hitting the hard thing and the soft thing, they're probably going to hit the soft thing. So they're coming back at you. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to be even more emphatic about making it clear when you move over into the lane. You're actually not going to be in the right tire track because that's not clear from a distance. You're going to move even further left than that because on that photo from the windshield view that, I mean, you look at that and even the most spatially challenged person knows from a distance they're going to have to change lanes. Right. The cool thing about this is that the motorists recognize so far away that they need to change lanes that they never have to take their foot off the gas. And so what was interesting was that before I tried this, I thought, well, yeah, okay, maybe it works, but people are going to honk at me, yell at me, and throw things at me. But the truth was, I actually got less incivility. People honked at me less. I rarely have people honk at me, and the reason was because I wasn't actually interfering with them and making them slow down. I was communicating with them so that they didn't have to slow down, so that they could pass me more easily. So that's so counterintuitive, but it's amazing. It works. Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're advancing the point of decision for the driver. The driver needs to make that and will naturally make that point of decision much sooner. They'll either slow down slightly, they'll move over more quickly, they'll take the left lane more readily than waiting to the last minute when they're faced with the dilemma.
Exactly. And then the other advantage to that is that when they move into that left lane earlier, they exposed you to the vehicles behind them, which allows those vehicles to move into the left lane earlier. And so then you end up clearing out that right lane at a distance, and you don't have people end up piling up in the right lane. And I actually put a link to a video where we demonstrated the difference where riding in the right tire track, Mike was actually the one riding, and I took dashboard video. Riding in the right tire track, he wasn't visible until the very last second because the motorist waited, even though the other 2 lanes were clear, they waited and they just bumped out around him. And so that actually creates another high risk situation for the cyclist, because if somebody, comes flying up and all of a sudden you bump out, then you're going to run into an issue with the person following them possibly not seeing you till the last second.
This is really, we're going to talk about a more advanced study of this than just this conversation we're having today. And we're going to tell people where you can get the full course that Keri teaches online and in person. We've had some people sign in, Serge and Victor and Harris Hickman. I think you know some of these folks. And
hi, guys.
Big heads up for the information. Thanks, guys, for signing in. So talk about lane position too. You and I discussed it. It's not just the going down the road in the through lane, but you're approaching an intersection. And lane position has a big influence in terms of safety for vehicles turning out of a driveway, vehicles making a left turn that are approaching you and they want to turn left, or vehicles trying to negotiate through an intersection. Can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yes. These are
changes that dynamic.
These are the common intersection crash types, and they are primarily the fault of the motorist, almost always in these cases shown here. But what happens is when the cyclist is riding too far right, the cyclist could be invisible to the motorist because they could be screened by trees or passing cars. Or the cyclist could also be irrelevant to the motorist because if it's too easy for motorists to pass, sometimes they just don't even notice. And that's often the case with the right hook. So the three common intersection crashes are the right hook, where a motorist passes you and then turns right immediately in your path. The left cross, where the motorist turns left across your path. And the drive out, where the motorist enters the roadway into your path, okay? So riding further left increases your visibility for all. First of all, for the right hook, riding further left makes you relevant to the drivers. And so if they have to change lanes to pass you before turning right, the vast majority of them are just going to slow down and wait until you pass the intersection and then turn right behind you. And then for the left cross, for one thing, it increases your visibility. It makes you more relevant to them, but it also allows you to avoid what we call a moving screen, which is where a motorist passing on your left hides you from that left turning driver until all of a sudden they clear the intersection and there you are in the left turn.
Right.
So when you notice those conditions, it's best to negotiate away from the edge. If you were particularly in a bike lane, you might want to negotiate away, or at least not enter the intersection until you can see that left turn pocket. So moving further left increases not only your visibility to those conflicting drivers, but also your vantage to see them. Make sure that you can see that left turn pocket and the driver in that, so that you can react if they do violate your right of way. And then the same is true for the drive out. You want to make yourself clear of any sight obstructions that would be on the right side of the road, trees and poles and things like that. You want to make sure that you can see the driver of any car that's waiting at that intersection to come out, and that they also can see you. So it's a two-way vantage and visibility. And so and motorcyclists are taught this too for exactly the same reason. It's about improving your ability to react as well as their ability to see you.
So, we see the circumstances every day in our practice. I've got multiple cases of every one of those examples that you gave. One of the things that I talk to cyclists about is, this kind of goes hand in glove with what you're saying. Motors tend to make split-second decisions. They're scanning the terrain ahead. Suddenly there's a break. I can make it, and they go, and their focus is on the cars coming, which are a threat to them. They're not focused on things that are out of that visual line that they're looking at. This goes into a whole discussion about visibility, which we could talk about another time, which I talk about all the time, to raise your visibility level by what you wear. But lane position is hand in glove with that.
Absolutely.
So you're cutting down, you're increasing the odds that the motorist is going to see you timely and be able to make appropriate decisions before executing the turn or making the pass or whatever they're going to do. And I think I appreciate your thoughts on that, Keri.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's if you can dress up like the mothership, but if you're outside of their field of view or hidden by another vehicle, they're not going to see you.
Yeah. And a little bit of a disclaimer here too. Motorists are sometimes unpredictable. They sometimes, despite the cyclist doing everything right, the motorist can make a mistake and do the wrong thing, even when you're in the proper lane position. So there is no guaranteed safe place to be on a bicycle, whether it's on the sidewalk, on the right-hand side of the road, or in the position that Keri's talking about. I think what we have an obligation to ourselves and others is to execute it and you look at the circumstances and make a decision you think is best for you and the safest for you, and to get you from point A to point B without being hit by a car. But cars have to do the reasonable thing. They need to slow down, they need to watch, they need to not run into us. And we can't guarantee that in every situation, regardless of the position you take on the road. But again, this is all part of, you want to increase the odds, and what you're talking about increases the odds of being seen and avoided.
Yeah, we're doing the best we can to reduce risk. And,
Correct.
This is a multi-pronged approach to reach the Vision Zero goal. It's the cyclists doing the best we can, because obviously it's our skin in the game, but we also need to teach motorists, because these particular mistakes are very predictable. At least that's one thing about motorists, is that when they make mistakes, they're pretty predictable. And we need to teach them not to make those mistakes, and to be more attentive as well.
Yeah, and they all fall into patterns. They fall into patterns of decision-making and choices and conduct, both on drivers and on cyclists as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So address for a minute, if you would, the law says that if there's a bike lane, the law seems to indicate you need to be in the bike lane. What's your instruction relative to bike lanes, and when you believe it's best to get out of them?
Well, our law was kind of mashed together. They shoved the bike lane statute into the lane position statute, which makes it a little bit confusing, because the same exceptions apply, except obviously the narrow lane exception wouldn't, because you have a bike lane. So the exceptions, basically, again, section, you have to leave it to make a left turn. Okay, you can't make a left turn from the bike lane. You have to merge into the travel lane or a left turn lane if there's one. You can leave the bike lane to pass slower traffic. You can legally pass slower car traffic in the bike lane, but you need to be careful. That's a whole nother discussion, because you're coming up into people's blind spots. And then you can leave the bike lane to avoid any unsafe condition or potential condition that could be developing that would be unsafe. So some examples of that would be, if the bike lane is next to parked cars and entirely in the door zone, as in there's no buffer between the bike lane and the parked cars, as there should be, then you don't have to ride in the bike lane and subject yourself to potentially being doored. You can leave the bike lane because it is an unsafe condition. So that's one thing. A door zone bike lane is not mandatory. If there are parked cars there, you don't have to ride in something that could, subject you to being killed, basically.
We actually have miles of that kind of situation here in Pinellas County on Gulf Boulevard running along the coast. There are a number of places where there's a bike lane next to where cars park, or there's a sharrow and there's no bike lane, and you're right next to the door zone. So you're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah, well, and the sharrow should be placed in the effective lane, which on that picture is the green part, but they don't always get placed in the best spot. The thing about the sharrow, though, it doesn't have any legal regulatory meaning, so it doesn't matter where the sharrow is. You can ride where it's safe and not worry about it.
It's a reminder to motorists, really.
Yeah, it should be a reminder to motorists that the bicyclist should be expected to control the lane on that particular road. But again, they're not always put in the best place. So some other reasons to leave the bike lane would be if you have poor sight lines and you're approaching an intersection, you might negotiate your way out of the bike lane in order to pass that intersection in a place where you have better vantage and visibility. Similarly, you might, if you have a lot of right turning traffic at a particular intersection, I personally will leave the bike lane and go ahead and control the lane past an intersection that has a lot of right turning traffic. Sometimes if I'm just passing like intersection after intersection and there isn't a lot of traffic, I'll simply look over my shoulder and check for traffic before I get there, rather than going in and out and in and out, because that's kind of a pain. But and then, you know, same thing with left turning traffic. I also, if I'm on a road that I'm not familiar with and I'm approaching a big intersection that I can't see the other side of, a lot of times I'll leave the bike lane before I go through the intersection, because I don't necessarily know that there's a bike lane on the other side. We have a lot of those, right? I'm sure you have them in your town. I have them in mine, where the bike lane ends at an intersection and there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that there's no bike lane on. So, you know, anytime I teach my students that anytime you feel that the bike lane is putting you into a conflict, a lot of times there's bike lanes that are improperly striped to the right of a right turn lane. We have some bike lanes that go to the right of a high-speed ramp and then all of a sudden jump over that ramp at the interchange. So I'm going to choose the position that's going to be the safest for me. And if I think the bike lane is going to put me in a conflict, I'm not going to be in the bike lane. But I always tell the students, is like, if you choose to do that and then all of a sudden you see that the bike lane really isn't creating a conflict, or it becomes a safe place again, you can go back into it really easily. What's not easy is getting out of a bike lane when you suddenly discover that it's running you to the right of a interchange, you know, interstate on-ramp, and now you're trapped there. It's really hard to get out of it. So I think that you always have to balance it against your safety when you're choosing where to be.
Very interesting. Up in the villages, they have, I'm not sure if you've been up there, but they have roundabouts. Mm-hmm. And invariably, they have, many of the roads up there have bike lanes. Some are 2-lane in each direction. They have bike lanes on the right that end abruptly at the roundabout.
With no warning.
Negotiate out of the bike lane into the traffic lane. And there, you know, I'm sure there's a safe way to do it, but we have a lot of conflicts that occur in the roundabouts up there.
Sure. Well, you should never have a bike lane in a roundabout, because that's a series of right turns. Bicyclists and motorists go the same speed in a roundabout typically, because they're all, you know, the speeds are bicycle speeds. But they need to do a better job of guiding bicyclists out of the bike lane as they approach the roundabout. End it earlier and put some sharrows leading up to it. There are a lot of designs where they will actually take the bike lane and lead it onto a sidewalk so the bicyclists can become pedestrians in the roundabout. And if you don't want to control the lane through the roundabout, that's an option, but it'll take you a lot longer to get through the roundabout that way, because you're going to have to deal with crossing traffic.
Correct. So I know that and your teaching isn't just really Keri's opinion. I know that you've got data and studies and law enforcement and what have you. So talk a little bit about how you have come to teach what you teach.
Well, I did a fair amount of study probably 15 years ago, because I had gotten to the point in my own riding where I was facing so many conflicts and I was tired of being a road warrior. And I was like, I either have to find a better way to do this, or I'm just going to quit. And so I started doing some research, and I came across a lot of the original vehicular cycling content written by Forrester and others, and started implementing some of those ideas, and it really changed my experience. And it just changing my lane position changed my experience with motorists. I mean, I thought that all motorists were just jerks, and they were stupid, and they were mean, and they were trying to kill me. And when I changed my behavior, they all got a whole lot smarter. And I mean, the percentage of problems I had went down so dramatically that it's actually rare for me to have conflicts anymore on the road when I ride. It's amazing how much easier things got just with that one simple change. But then, you know, with Cycling Savvy, we did, you know, with our advice about riding on multi-lane roads and moving further left, that came from studies. Brian D'Souza and Dan Gutierrez in Southern California went out and did a video study where they changed their lane position on the same stretch of road and rode it over and over and over again, and determined where you needed to be to get those full early lane changes. And the next level that I wanted to take it to for Cycling Savvy was, not everybody wants to be a road warrior, go out and control a lane to get where they're going, right? Sometimes, like a lot of us, even myself included, I like riding on quieter streets just because they're quieter for, I don't want all the noise. And so what we did was we developed a number of strategies to allow people to get through busy interchanges and even deal with crazy stuff like diverging lanes and things like that with a minimal amount of traffic, to be able to problem solve the environment, use traffic signal timing, use an understanding of traffic flow, use communication to be able to connect those networks of quiet streets without having to really be in the thick of heavy traffic. And so that's what Cycling Savvy is about. It's about that toolkit of giving people these strategies to be able to ride where they want, the way they want, without really having to feel like they have to be, like super commuter road warrior, strong and brave and whatever that is.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that a lot. And I know it's just, what you're about is to make cycling enjoyable and safe and increasing the experience for us through effective communication with motorists. And I think a lot of people are familiar with the League of American Bicyclists, the LAB, and many people, particularly some of the bike clubs, tend to rely on the LAB for instruction. So how does what you do compare or mesh or differ, if it does, from what the LAB teaches?
It's pretty similar in a lot of respects. The crossing crashes and typical crash prevention is very similar. We have taken it a little bit to the next level because I'm a league certified instructor as well. They pretty much stick with a lower speed environment, and they don't do the interchanges and the more complex roadways. They broke Forrester's original 30-hour college credit program. They broke it into sections. And so the first section, which is the one that almost is exclusively taught, has a lot of there's a lot of bike fit and nutrition and the tire changing and things like that. Takes up a lot of the time. So they don't have a lot of time to go into the more complex roadway scenarios. My feeling is hard enough to get people to take one bicycling class. So, I need to give them everything. If they're gonna take one bicycling class, I want to give them the full tool set to get through every roadway environment. So what we decided was, we're gonna let the bike shops do bike fit and tire changing and all of that, because the bike shops are already doing that, and we want our students to develop a relationship with their local bike shop. That's important. It's an important partnership. And so let's let them do that and bring people into their stores. And then we will teach the stuff that we've really problem solved and really gotten good at, which is, the traffic stuff, the full Monty, the whole scenario all the way through. So our students come in to our class, they do the classroom section where we go through all of this stuff on screen. And then we take them from basic balance to emergency drills in the morning on the bike handling session. And that is very similar to what the league teaches. We only have a couple extra drills that we put in there so that we could step people up from basic balance all the way to the instant turn and get them to be successful at it. We inserted some other drills. So we do that in the morning, and then we'll take those same people, we'll go through an interchange and a diverging lane situation by the afternoon, which is, it's amazing to see somebody who struggled with basic balance and starting and stopping at 9 o'clock in the morning, who is rocking a diverging lane through an interchange with the biggest smile you have ever seen. There is nothing like the expression of joy, of self-mastery for somebody to do something that they never even knew was possible. It gets me up in the morning.
Well, that's great. I understand that feeling, and we're going to talk about the next course that you have and some online information as well. Just have a little program break here. I hope you're enjoying the program with Keri this morning. This is amazing information, and we want to get it out to as many people as possible. One of the things that we run into in our practice, people calling from around the state wondering, Jim, you're in Clearwater, and I have a situation up here in Palatka or Orlando or wherever they might be. How does that work? Can you help me up here? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're never more than a phone call away. There's never a charge to talk about what we can or can't do. As a matter of fact, I tell clients in my practice, you won't write me a check at any point. If you have a successful case and we can get it resolved for you, we're going to get paid a percentage of the recovery. You're not going to ever sit down and write a check to me. You're not going to be billed for time or telephone calls or anything like that. So if you know someone that needs us or you have a need for us, we're only a phone call away. And I urge you to get your questions answered. Don't sit there kind of wondering, and certainly don't call a 1-800-mystery-lawyer who advertises they do bite cases. You deserve better than that. So Keri, talk to me a minute about the cone of surveillance. We got a cool graphic on that. I think that was very interesting when I saw that for the first time. Maybe Katie can bring that up. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so this is something that, and I don't have the citations for this, but there have been studies on eye tracking that show that as speed increases, as distraction increases, people develop tunnel vision. And the reason we put this out was to show that there are places that either motorists can't, or that they aren't looking because it's not relevant, or that they should be looking that they may not necessarily be looking. And part of the issue here is that people will say to us, oh gosh, if I ride out in that middle of the lane position, somebody's just going to run me over because they're looking at their phone. Well, on that type of a road, most of the time, I mean, there's no accounting for completely negligent, ridiculous people, but for the most part, the people who are occasionally glancing at something else are also glancing up. The only place they're looking is right in front of them. Generally, their cone of surveillance has narrowed down because the only thing that's relevant to them is that they not rear end a car. So that's kind of why we put that graphic out there, was to show that really that that position in the grand scheme of people being not all that attentive is actually being off to the side, where they glance up and they don't notice anything, and then they glance down and they drift off the road, for example.
Right. Okay. And you talked a few minutes ago about dooring issues in the door zone. Door issues are not limited to the driver's side of the vehicle. There are places where we have vehicles parked and the bike lane is to the right of the parked vehicles. We have those here as well. Talk a little bit about how to avoid the door zone.
Well, first of all, the best defense is to not be there, right? So staying out of the door zone, and not just the strike zone, because there's the strike zone is about 4 feet from the cars based on, there's varying widths, 3 to 4 feet. But if you're just outside the strike zone and a door opens suddenly in your path, you're going to swerve into traffic. So we also add in a buffer of, I think that starts at about 1.5 feet, but it depends on your temperament, right? To buffer yourself from that so that you don't swerve into traffic, because it doesn't matter what's going on in the front of your brain. If that happens, your autonomic nervous system is taking over and you're swerving into traffic. Right. So staying, 5 to 6 feet, 5.5 to 6 feet away from the car doors is going to keep you from that problem. Then what happens, and now we're talking about a bike lane next to a general use lane or a wide-ish general use lane. Now you have to determine how far you are from the lane line, because you're basically, once you eliminate the door zone, you're left with a narrow lane. So now you have to treat that effective lane like a narrow lane and close up the distance so that you don't end up with people squeezing past you and basically, pushing you back into the door zone. So the position that you take, and actually, I think you guys have a photo of that as well. The position that you take is going to seem really far out there, but that's because you then have to control that narrow, effective lane.
Yeah, I think Katie just put the that one photo up.
Yep, there it is. Yeah. And something to notice about that is where the tire tracks are there. Motorists don't drive in the door zone.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? Because they don't want to get doored either. Now, it is always the fault of the person who opened the door. If you open it in front of a car and the car takes the door off, it's your fault for opening the door. If you open it in front of a cyclist and kill them, it's your fault. But as a cyclist, I would prefer not to rely on people to look before opening their doors. They should, but I personally am not going to rely on that.
but they, by and large, they don't.
Right. And then when it's on the passenger side, it's a whole nother issue, as you mentioned.
Right.
And those bike lanes should be buffered. They should have a buffer that eats up the door zone so that the cyclists aren't riding in it.
Yeah. You know, we've had that exact case, someone on the passenger side popping out. But, you know, people who are exiting a vehicle by and large make the same quick decisions as they do as drivers. You know, it's like, I've got an opportunity, I'm going to pop out of the car here. And they're looking for cars, they're not even giving a cyclist consideration at all.
Or they're on their phone while they do it.
Yeah, right. So you have some effective information about communicating with drivers, and I was very fascinated with this, and I think our viewers will like it as well. So talk about some of the ways that we can effectively communicate with the driver. Okay, so you have the control and release, which is my favorite. Here's a situation, if you look at this image, where the lane position, the initial lane position is really just a passive communication. Again, that distance to the lane line is closed up and it's saying you need to use some of the other lane. The next image over is we're approaching a blind curve and I don't want the motorist behind me to make a bad decision and interfere with oncoming traffic, or worse, create a problem for me. So I've got my arm out and I've moved over to the lane line, and that's just saying, don't pass me. If you make it hard to pass and then you communicate with your arm out, they're very compliant. It's amazing. I have tons of video of a motorist wanting to pass and me sticking my arm out, or whoever I was filming behind me sticking their arm out, and the motorist just backing off. Yeah. And then releasing them. I like to communicate that I'm going to cooperate with the pass, so that they understand that I'm not going to like speed up or try to prevent them from passing. And so what I do is I usually will move over a little bit to the right, and then I'll wave. I'll give them a little thank you, and that says, "Hey, thanks for waiting," and go on ahead. And I almost always, if I look over when they're passing, I see their hand up to their waving back to me. So even if they've had to wait a little while, and we know that motorists don't like to sit behind cyclists and wait. But even if they've had to wait a little while, most of the time I will get a return thank you wave. It's amazing when you communicate and make yourself a human. It makes people behave so much better. So Serge has an interesting comment here. He said, "I don't want to have to rely on every single car occupant I pass in my entire life, not ever making a simple and common error like opening the door without checking for an oncoming cyclist." Which is the point that Keri's making, Serge. Thank you. So let's talk a minute about let me give a heads up too. When you were talking about communication and waving, I have to give a shout out to Mark Schieffer at Gulf Coast Velo, who's put together this Safe Cycling Coalition in Southwest Florida. And one of the things that they're doing is being proactive as cyclists about, let's wave to people in advance. Let's acknowledge people with our hands. Let's give them a wave. Let's give them a nod. A little bit more of the positive communication that we can make as cyclists on the road to kind of lower the temperature of the potential animosity between cyclists and drivers. Exactly. I do this when you approach a stop sign and there's other motorists there. Let them know that you're stopping, first of all. Second of all, smile at them. Because people can't not smile back to you. That's another, it's like an automatic response. They will have to smile back to you. Their brains are gonna release oxytocin. They're gonna feel happy, and they're gonna associate that with cyclists. So yeah, absolutely. Anytime that you reward somebody or you smile at them, it makes them feel good.
And
Well,
you want them to feel good and with cyclists.
I mean, we have thousands and thousands of cyclists on the road. If we could all do this, what a huge impact it would make. So, Keri, this has been great information, and I much appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. Talk a little bit about your course opportunities. You've got an in-class course coming up in March, and you also have an online access to course material. Talk about that a minute.
Yes. So we have an online anytime course. We have a free essentials course. So you can go create a free membership and you can see the essentials course, and that is all the basic safety stuff. We wanted that to be free. We don't want money to stand in the way of people getting that information. We have a basic course and a mastery course, and those are bundled in a Ride Awesome membership. And that really is, that membership is our way of making money to sustain our organization, to provide the information that we provide. So, so that the mastery course, the basic course is safety oriented, lots of animations and videos. It's also, you know, the rules and some history and things like that. The mastery course is really the meat of the cycling savvy strategies. It's a very robust course. It probably has 30 or 40% more material than we can teach in the classroom because we're limited for time. Our in-person class, we teach obviously the basic safety and the strategy in a classroom, and then we have a bike handling session, and then we have a tour, and it's a tour of your city where we take people through all of these features and give them the firsthand experience with them. We have a class coming up in Orlando in March 22nd, 23rd. And there will also be a class in Gainesville in March. Now that one, if you have a UFID, if you're staff, faculty, or student at UF, that is free. So you go through their sustainability department for that. We have scholarships. So if you have a financial need, if you don't, you know, if you can't afford the cost of our course, we have 50% scholarships for that. All you have to do is contact us. So there's links all over the site for that. So, and we also have a scholarship fund. So if you want to donate to help other people get a scholarship, you can do that on our site as well.
So Katie is running information about on the screen about go to cyclingsavvy.org for this information. You can sign up for the courses. You can sign up for the online course. So Keri, this has been great. I very much appreciate it. I think this is information that we really need to get out to the cycling community. You and I have talked about maybe doing some other things to help promote this, and I look forward to that, pursuing that conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I appreciate you and the work that you're doing for cycling in Florida.
Thank you, Jim. I'm grateful for you having us on. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.